The autumn wind carried dust through the streets of Cherry Creek, Colorado Territory, 1859, as Beatrice Barlow clutched the crumpled letter in her trembling hands. The news had spread faster than wildfire in the newly established settlement near Denver. The town council had rendered their verdict. Exile, all because she had dared to speak what no one else would about the corrupt mayor and his scheme to swindle prospectors out of their claims. Beatrice stood on the porch of her modest boarding house, the only home she'd known since traveling west after her parents' passing 2 years prior. At 22, she had built a life for herself as a schoolteacher, respected for her education and dedication, until she uncovered ledgers proving Mayor Hollister had been recording false claims and stealing land from honest miners. Miss Barlow, Mrs. Finch, the boarding house owner, called from the doorway. "I've been instructed to inform you that you must vacate these premises by sundown tomorrow." The older woman's eyes revealed her conflict, sympathy warring with fear of association. "I understand," Beatrice replied, her voice steady despite the storm within. "Though I regret nothing. The people deserve to know the truth." "Truth doesn't always set folks free, dear," Mrs. Finch sighed. "Sometimes it just sets them against you." Beatrice turned away, blinking back tears. 24 hours to gather her belongings and leave the town. No job references, no prospects, just the clothes on her back and whatever she could carry. But she refused to show weakness. She had been right, and no banishment could change that fact. As Beatrice began packing her meager possessions, someone knocked at her door. She opened it cautiously to find Sally, one of her young students, holding a small pouch. "Miss Barlow, Pa said to give you this," the child whispered, thrusting the pouch into Beatrice's hands. "He said you're the only honest person in this whole town, and that ain't a crime." Beatrice opened the pouch to find $15, a fortune for the blacksmith's family. "Sally, I can't. Pa said you'd say that, but he also said to tell you that truth needs allies." With that, the girl darted away. That night, Beatrice lay awake, contemplating her options. She had relatives back east, but the journey would be costly and dangerous for a woman alone. The nearest sizable settlement was Denver, but what awaited her there? More of the same corruption. She had no allies, no connections, just her principles and determination. Morning came too quickly. Beatrice donned her best traveling dress, packed her trunk with books, clothing, and the few keepsakes from her parents. As she made her final preparations, another knock came at her door. This time it was Mr. Peterson from the general store. He glanced nervously down the hallway before speaking. "Miss Barlow, my cousin runs a boarding house in Boulder. It's not much, but it's honest work and a roof. I've written you a letter of introduction." He pressed a folded paper into her hands. "The stagecoach leaves in an hour. I'd suggest you be on it." Beatrice was overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I won't forget this. Just remember, some of us believed you," he said, tipping his hat before hurrying away. The stagecoach depot was abuzz with morning activity when Beatrice arrived. She kept her head high, ignoring the whispers and stares from townsfolk who'd once greeted her warmly. She had just handed her trunk to the stagecoach driver when she felt a presence behind her. "Miss Barlow," Mayor Hollister's deep voice made her stiffen. "Leaving us so soon?" Beatrice turned slowly, meeting his gaze with defiance. "As ordered, Mayor, though banishment seems a harsh punishment for telling the truth." Hollister's smile never reached his cold eyes. "The truth, as you call it, is merely your interpretation of complex business matters beyond your understanding. A woman should know her place. My place is wherever honest people value integrity over greed," Beatrice replied, "which apparently isn't here." The mayor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're fortunate it's only banishment. Accusations against men of standing can lead to far worse consequences." Before Beatrice could respond, a deep voice intervened. "Is there a problem here?" Both turned to see a tall man in trail-worn clothes, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Despite the dust covering his attire, there was something commanding in his posture. "No problem, stranger," Hollister replied. his tone instantly more cordial. "Just seeing off a former resident." "Seemed more like threatening from where I stood," the stranger said casually, though his hand rested near the revolver holstered at his hip. Mayor Hollister's smile tightened. "You're mistaken. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have town business to attend to." With a final warning glance at Beatrice, he strode away. The stranger turned to Beatrice. "You all right, madam?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, studying him. He stood over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a sun-weathered face that suggested years spent outdoors. His eyes, a striking blue, held a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Though your intervention wasn't necessary, I'm quite capable of handling men like Mayor Hollister." A hint of amusement touched his lips. "Never doubted it for a second, madam, but sometimes even capable folks deserve backup." He tipped his hat. "Matthew James, at your service. Beatrice Barlow," she replied, "and I appreciate the gesture, Mr. James, but I should be boarding now." "Boulder bound?" he asked, noticing her ticket. "Yes, do you know it? Passed through many times." "Good mining town, decent folks mostly." He seemed to hesitate before adding, "I'm headed that direction myself, actually. My ranch is about halfway between here and there." The stagecoach driver called for passengers to board. Beatrice gathered her handbag. "It was nice meeting you, Mr. James." "Thank you again for your kindness." "The pleasure was mine, Miss Barlow." He helped her aboard the coach, then stepped back as the driver closed the door. Beatrice settled into her seat, exhaling slowly as the coach jerked forward. Through the window, she saw Matthew James watching the departure, his expression thoughtful. She would probably never see him again, but in a day filled with painful goodbyes, his brief kindness had been a welcome respite. The stagecoach rumbled out of Cherry Creek, carrying Beatrice toward an uncertain future. She refused to look back at the town that had rejected her. Instead, she focused on the landscape ahead, the sweeping plains giving way to the majestic mountains in the distance. Whatever awaited her in Boulder, she would face it with the same courage that had carried her this far. The journey proved more eventful than Beatrice had anticipated. Barely an hour outside of town, the coach driver shouted and the vehicle lurched to an abrupt halt. Beatrice was thrown forward, narrowly avoiding collision with the passenger opposite her. "What's happening?" a nervous merchant asked, peering out the window. The answer came swiftly as the coach door was yanked open. A man with a bandana covering his face pointed a revolver inside. "Everybody out, valuables in the sack, and nobody gets hurt." Heart pounding, Beatrice followed the other passengers outside where 2 more masked men waited on horseback, rifles trained on the group. The driver stood with his hands raised, looking furious but helpless. "Ladies first," the first robber said, thrusting a burlap sack toward Beatrice. "Jewelry, money, anything worth taking." Beatrice's mind raced. The $15 from Sally's father was hidden in her bodice, but her mother's locket, her most precious possession, hung visibly around her neck. Her hand moved to it protectively. "The necklace too, lady," the robber demanded. "Please," Beatrice began. "It's only silver and has no value except I'll decide what's valuable," the man snarled, reaching for the locket. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted him. All eyes turned to see a rider approaching at speed, rifle ready. Even at a distance, Beatrice recognized Matthew James. "Trouble," one of the mounted robbers called. The one nearest Beatrice grabbed her arm, yanking her against him as a shield. "Stay back or the woman gets it." He shouted as Matthew slowed his approach. "Let her go," Matthew called, his voice carrying across the distance. "You boys picked the wrong coach to rob." "And you picked the wrong time to play hero," the robber retorted, pressing his pistol to Beatrice's temple. What happened next occurred so quickly that Beatrice could barely process it. Matthew fired his rifle, the bullet striking the ground near the feet of one of the mounted robbers' horses. The animal reared in panic, throwing its rider. In the moment of confusion, Beatrice drove her elbow hard into her captor's ribs, a move her father had taught her years ago. He loosened his grip enough for her to wrench free. Matthew charged forward on his horse, firing again, this time over the heads of the remaining robbers. The coach passengers scattered for cover as one of the thieves returned fire. "Get down," Matthew shouted to Beatrice. She dropped to the ground as he dismounted in one fluid motion, taking position behind his horse for cover. The exchange of gunfire was brief but intense. One robber took a bullet to the shoulder, screaming in pain. The leader, recognizing their disadvantage, shouted a retreat. They scrambled onto their horses, abandoning their fallen companion, and galloped away across the plains. Silence fell. Beatrice slowly rose to her feet, brushing dust from her dress with trembling hands. Matthew approached the injured robber, disarming him before checking his wound. "You'll live," he said grimly to the man, then turned to the shaken coach driver. "Tie him up. The sheriff in Boulder can deal with him." Only then did Matthew turn to Beatrice. "Are you hurt, Miss Barlow?" "No," she managed, though her voice wavered. "Thank you again. It seems I'm becoming indebted to you." His eyes softened with concern. No debt in helping someone in need. He glanced at the other passengers who were cautiously emerging from their hiding places. "Is everyone else all right?" After ensuring no one was injured, Matthew helped secure the wounded robber to the coach. The driver, eager to make up for lost time, hurried everyone back aboard. "You coming with us to Boulder, Mr. James?" the driver asked. Matthew hesitated, looking at Beatrice. "I hadn't planned to, but it might be wise to see this fella delivered to the sheriff." He nodded toward the captured robber, "and to ensure there are no more unexpected delays." Beatrice felt an unexpected rush of relief at his decision. Though she prided herself on self-reliance, the day's events had left her more shaken than she cared to admit. The remaining journey passed without incident, though the mood inside the coach remained tense. Beatrice found herself seated beside Matthew, who maintained a respectful distance while keeping watchful eyes on both the prisoner and the passing landscape. "May I ask why you're headed to Boulder?" Matthew inquired quietly. Beatrice hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I'm seeking a fresh start. Most folks out here are," he observed, "though usually not well-educated schoolteachers." She raised an eyebrow. "How did you know I was a teacher?" A slight smile crossed his face. "The books in your trunk, primer, arithmetic texts. Either you're uncommonly devoted to learning or you teach it." "Both, actually," Beatrice admitted. After a pause, she added, "I was asked to leave Cherry Creek." "Asked or forced?" She met his gaze directly. "Banished, officially. For speaking truths the powerful preferred to keep hidden." Instead of the skepticism she expected, Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "Courage is rare in these parts, Miss Barlow. Most folks are too busy surviving to worry about right and wrong." "And you, Mr. James, what brings a rancher into town on the exact day I'm departing?" His blue eyes held hers for a moment. "Supplies, initially, but I make it a habit to know what's happening in nearby settlements. Word travels about a schoolteacher publicly accusing the mayor of claim jumping and record falsification." Beatrice stiffened. "You knew who I was all along." "I knew of the situation," he clarified. "Didn't know you were the teacher in question until I overheard your conversation with Hollister." He lowered his voice further. "For what it's worth, you're not the first to notice his schemes, just the first with the guts to say something publicly." Before Beatrice could respond, the coach began to slow as it approached the outskirts of Boulder. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling mining town, larger and more developed than Cherry Creek. Wooden buildings lined the main street, with miners, merchants, and settlers moving purposefully about their business. The coach rolled to a stop outside the sheriff's office. Matthew assisted the driver in transferring their prisoner while Beatrice gathered her belongings. After the excitement of the journey, the mundane task of finding her new lodgings felt strangely anticlimactic. She retrieved Mr. Peterson's letter of introduction and was about to ask directions when Matthew reappeared at her side. "Sheriff says there's been a string of coach robberies lately." "You were lucky I happened along." "Luck had little to do with it," Beatrice replied. "You were following the coach, weren't you? A flicker of surprise crossed his features, followed by a rueful smile. "Keeping an eye on it," he admitted. "After seeing Hollister's reaction to you, I reckoned you might need an ally on the road." The honesty of his response disarmed her. "Then I'm grateful for your foresight, Mr. James." "Matthew, please," he said. "Mr. James was my father." "Very well, Matthew," she conceded. "I should be on my way to find Mrs. Langdon's boarding house." "On Pine Street," he supplied immediately. When she looked surprised, he added, "Small town. Everyone knows Margaret Langdon runs the cleanest boarding house for respectable ladies. Would you, perhaps, point me in the right direction?" Beatrice asked, feeling uncharacteristically uncertain in this new place. "Better yet, I'll walk you there," Matthew offered, taking her trunk from the coach driver. "Boulder can be confusing for newcomers." As they made their way through town, Beatrice was acutely aware of curious glances from passers-by. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but one accompanied by a man like Matthew, tall, armed, and moving with the easy confidence of someone familiar with frontier life, drew even more attention. "You seem known here," she observed. "I trade in Boulder regularly," he explained. "My ranch is about 20 miles southwest, good grazing land with a year-round creek. You mentioned that earlier. What do you raise?" "Cattle mainly, some horses, enough to make a decent living." They turned onto Pine Street, a quieter residential area with well-maintained homes. Matthew stopped before a 2-story white house with a wide porch and neat garden. "Mrs. Langdon's," he said, setting down Beatrice's trunk. "Best apple pie in the territory if you've a sweet tooth." Before Beatrice could respond, the front door opened, and a plump, gray-haired woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Matthew James, as I live and breathe, haven't seen you in town for months." Her keen eyes shifted to Beatrice. "And who might this young lady be?" Matthew performed the introductions. "Mrs. Langdon, this is Miss Beatrice Barlow. She has a letter from Jefferson Peterson over in Cherry Creek." Beatrice handed over the letter, which Mrs. Langdon read quickly, her expression warming. "Jeff's a good judge of character. Any friend of his is welcome here." She gestured toward the door. "Come in, dear, you must be exhausted from your journey." Beatrice turned to Matthew. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay." "No need," he interrupted gently. "Just glad you arrived safely." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be in town for another day or so, settling some business. Perhaps I could call on you tomorrow, show you around Boulder a bit." The offer surprised her. While grateful for his assistance, Beatrice had assumed their paths would naturally diverge once she reached her destination. Yet something in his earnest expression made her nod. "I would appreciate that, Matthew. Thank you." He tipped his hat. "Until tomorrow then, Miss Barlow, Mrs." Langdon watched this exchange with interest, but said nothing until Matthew had departed, and they were inside the boarding house. As she showed Beatrice to a comfortable room on the second floor, she finally commented, "Matthew James doesn't typically escort ladies around town." "You must have made quite an impression." "We met under unusual circumstances," Beatrice explained vaguely. "Most meetings with Matthew are unusual," Mrs. Langdon chuckled. "He keeps to himself mostly, runs that ranch of his with just a couple of hands for help. Honest as the day is long, though." Respected hereabouts, she left Beatrice to settle in, promising dinner would be served at 6. Alone at last, Beatrice sank onto the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. Exile, robbery, rescue, and now she found herself in a strange town with nothing but uncertain prospects ahead. Yet as she unpacked her trunk, placing her books on the small shelf by the window, Beatrice felt a tentative hope. Boulder was larger than Cherry Creek, with more opportunities. Perhaps here she could build a new life, one where speaking the truth wouldn't lead to banishment. And Matthew James. She touched her mother's locket, remembering how he'd arrived just when needed. Coincidence, perhaps, but his offer to show her around suggested an interest beyond mere courtesy. Despite her usual caution around men, Beatrice found herself looking forward to tomorrow. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Beatrice dressed carefully in her blue calico dress, the nicest she owned that was suitable for daytime wear. After a hearty breakfast with Mrs. Langdon and the other two boarders, a widow named Mrs. Clark and a young seamstress named Ida Beatrice set out to explore the vicinity of the boarding house. Boulder was indeed larger than Cherry Creek, with more permanent structures and less of the makeshift quality that characterized newer settlements. The streets were laid out in a more orderly fashion, with wooden sidewalks along the main thoroughfares. She counted 2 churches, several saloons, a newspaper office, and various businesses that spoke of a thriving community. She was examining the notices in the window of the general store when a familiar voice greeted her. "Good morning, Miss Barlow. I see you're getting acquainted with our little town." Beatrice turned to find Matthew looking considerably more presentable than the day before. He'd exchanged his trail clothes for clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair damp from a recent washing. The transformation was striking, revealing a handsome face previously half hidden by dust and trail grime. "Good morning, Matthew," she replied. "Yes, Boulder seems quite established compared to Cherry Creek. Been a settlement since '58, he confirmed. Got more respectable folks moving in as the mining stabilizes." He gestured down the street. "Would you like to continue your exploration with a guide? I promised you a tour." "I would, thank you." As they walked, Matthew pointed out locations of interest, which stores offered fair prices, which restaurants served decent meals, where the school was located. Beatrice found herself particularly interested in the latter. "Do they have a teacher?" she asked, studying the small schoolhouse. "They did. Miss Hathaway married a miner last month and moved to his claim outside town. I believe they're seeking a replacement." Beatrice felt a spark of hope. "Perhaps I should inquire." "I'd be happy to introduce you to Mr. Wilson on the school board," Matthew offered. "He takes his midday meal at the cafe around noon." Their tour continued, and Beatrice was impressed by Matthew's knowledge of the town and its inhabitants. He seemed to know everyone, exchanging greetings with shopkeepers, miners, and ladies alike. More notably, he was clearly well respected, a fact that spoke to his character. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked as they paused by a small park where children played under the watchful eyes of their mothers. "6 years now," he replied. "Came west after the war looking for open spaces and fewer ghosts." The mention of war caught her attention. "You fought," a shadow crossed his face. "Union cavalry, not something I speak of often." Beatrice nodded, understanding his reticence. Many who'd survived the bloody conflict preferred to leave those memories buried. "My father lost a brother at Antietam," she said quietly. "I was there," Matthew said, his voice low. "Bloodiest day I ever hope to see." A moment of silence passed between them, a shared acknowledgement of things too painful to articulate. Then Matthew deliberately lightened his tone. "But that's past now. Out here a man can build something new." He glanced at her. "Same for a woman of courage, I expect." Before Beatrice could respond, they were interrupted by a boisterous greeting. A portly man with an impressive mustache approached, hand extended toward Matthew. "James, heard you brought in one of Patterson's gang yesterday. Good work." Matthew shook the man's hand. "Sheriff did the hard part, Mayor Bennett. I just delivered the package." Beatrice tensed at the word mayor, her experience with Hollister still raw. Matthew noticed and smoothly made introductions. "Miss Barlow, this is Mayor Thomas Bennett." "Mayor, Miss Beatrice Barlow, newly arrived from Cherry Creek." Mayor Bennett tipped his hat. "Welcome to Boulder, Miss Barlow. Cherry Creek's loss is our gain, I'm sure." "Thank you, sir," she replied cautiously. Miss Barlow was the schoolteacher in Cherry Creek, Matthew added. "I mentioned Miss Hathaway's position is still open." Bennett's eyes lit with interest. "Is that so? We've been hoping for a qualified teacher. Our children need education if Boulder's to grow properly." He studied Beatrice appraisingly. "Would you be interested in discussing the position with our school board?" Surprised by this sudden opportunity, Beatrice composed herself quickly. "I would indeed, Mayor Bennett. I have excellent references from my previous position in Illinois." She carefully omitted Cherry Creek, where she doubted Hollister would provide any recommendation. Splendid. The board meets tomorrow afternoon at the schoolhouse, 3 o'clock. I'll inform them to expect you. With another tip of his hat, Bennett continued on his way, calling greetings to other citizens as he went. Beatrice turned to Matthew, suspicion mingling with gratitude. "Did you arrange that encounter?" His eyes crinkled with amusement. "I may have mentioned to the barber this morning that a qualified teacher had arrived in town. News travels fast in Boulder. You didn't know I'd be interested in the position, didn't I?" He raised an eyebrow. "You're a teacher without a position in a town that needs a teacher." Seemed a natural conclusion. "What if I'm not qualified? You know nothing about my abilities." "I know you stood up to corruption when it would have been easier to stay silent," he said simply. "That tells me everything important about your character. The rest is just details." His faith in her was both flattering and unsettling. "You place a great deal of stock in a brief acquaintance, Mr. James." "Matthew," he corrected gently, "and sometimes you just know quality when you see it." The clock on the courthouse chimed noon, breaking the moment. Matthew offered his arm. "Shall we meet Mr. Wilson at the cafe? Might as well begin your introductions to the school board." Beatrice hesitated, then placed her hand on his arm. "Lead the way." The next few hours passed in a whirl of introductions and conversations. Mr. Wilson, a serious man with spectacles and a thoughtful manner, asked informed questions about Beatrice's teaching philosophy and experience. By the end of their meal, she felt confident about her prospects with the school board. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Matthew walked Beatrice back toward Mrs. Langdon's boarding house. They had spent nearly the entire day together, and Beatrice was surprised by how comfortable she felt in his company. Unlike many men she'd met, he listened when she spoke and showed genuine interest in her thoughts and opinions. "Thank you for today," she said as they reached the boarding house gate. "Your introductions may prove invaluable." "It was my pleasure," he replied. "Boulder needs good people." He seemed about to say more, then hesitated. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Not wrong, no, He adjusted his hat. "I need to return to my ranch tomorrow after your school board meeting. There's work that can't wait much longer." "Of course," Beatrice nodded, ignoring a surprising twinge of disappointment. "You've already been most generous with your time." "I'd like to call on you again," he said directly, "when I return to town next week, if that would be acceptable." The formal request took her by surprise. "Yes, that would be acceptable." A genuine smile transformed his features. "Good, I'll look forward to hearing how you fare with the school board." He tipped his hat. "Good evening, Miss Barlow." "Good evening, Matthew." Beatrice watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. A man of contradictions, trail-worn yet educated, capable of violence yet unfailingly gentle in his manners. Unlike anyone she'd met before. As she turned to enter the boarding house, Mrs. Langdon opened the door with a knowing smile. "Had a pleasant day, did we?" "Very informative," Beatrice replied primly, though she couldn't quite suppress her own smile. "I'm meeting with the school board tomorrow about the teaching position." "Wonderful news," Mrs. Langdon exclaimed. Though not surprising, Matthew James doesn't do anything halfway, including helping newcomers get established. That night, as Beatrice prepared for bed, she found her thoughts returning repeatedly to Matthew. His kindness toward a stranger was remarkable enough, but there was something more and understanding in his eyes when she spoke of standing for truth, as though he recognized that drive in himself. The following afternoon, Beatrice sat before the Boulder School Board 5 men of varying ages who listened attentively as she outlined her qualifications and teaching experience. Her years in Illinois had given her a strong foundation, and she spoke passionately about her commitment to education. "Why did you leave your position in Cherry Creek?" one board member asked. Beatrice had anticipated this question. "A difference in principles with town leadership," she answered carefully. "I believe in teaching children to value truth and integrity above all else. This sometimes puts one at odds with those who prefer comfort over honesty." Several board members exchanged glances, but Mayor Bennett, who sat among them, nodded thoughtfully. "Honesty is a value we encourage in Boulder," he said, "particularly in those who shape young minds." After a brief private deliberation, the board offered her the position to begin the following Monday. The salary, while modest, included lodging in the small teachers' quarters behind the schoolhouse, an arrangement that would allow her to save on boarding costs. As Beatrice emerged from the schoolhouse, elated by her success, she found Matthew waiting patiently beside his horse. "Good news?" he asked, though her smile had already given him his answer. "They offered me the position," she confirmed. "I start Monday. Congratulations," he said warmly. Boulder just improved its prospects considerably. "I couldn't have done this without your help," Beatrice acknowledged. "I'm in your debt." Matthew shook his head. "No debts between friends." He patted his saddlebag. "I need to get back to my ranch, but I wanted to see how things turned out." "That's very kind," Beatrice said, suddenly aware that she would miss his presence. In the brief time they'd known each other, he had become something of an anchor in her new life. "I'll be back in town next Saturday," he said, mounting his horse with easy grace. "Would you allow me to call on you then? Perhaps we could share a meal at the hotel restaurant." The invitation, clearly social rather than practical, made Beatrice pause. She had sworn off romantic entanglements after a painful disappointment in Illinois, focusing instead on her career and independence. Yet there was something about Matthew that inspired trust. "I would like that," she found herself saying. His smile lit his entire face. "Until Saturday, then." "Good luck with your preparations, Miss Barlow." As he rode away, Beatrice felt both anticipation and trepidation. A week suddenly seemed a very long time. The following days passed in a flurry of activity as Beatrice settled into her new quarters and prepared for classes. The schoolhouse was simple but well maintained, with rows of desks for approximately 30 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. The teachers' quarters consisted of a small parlor, bedroom, and kitchen, modest but perfectly adequate for her needs. Parents began visiting with their children, curious about the new teacher. Beatrice made every effort to be welcoming and professional, laying the groundwork for good relationships with the families whose trust she would need. By Saturday, she felt reasonably prepared for Monday's classes. She was arranging books on her shelf when a knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Matthew standing there, hat in hand, looking somewhat nervous despite his usual composure. "Good afternoon," he greeted her. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all," she assured him, surprised by how pleased she was to see him again. "Please come in." He stepped inside, glancing around the simple quarters. "You've made it homey already." "It didn't take much," she admitted. "Books make any place feel like home to me." Matthew nodded, running his fingers along the spine of a volume of Emerson's essays. Good company in any circumstance. His recognition of the author surprised her. "You're familiar with Emerson. Winter nights are long on the ranch," he said with a slight shrug. "Books help pass the time." He turned to face her fully. "You look well, Miss Barlow. Boulder agrees with you." "Beatrice, please," she offered, realizing the formality between them had become unnecessary. "And yes, I think it will. Everyone has been remarkably welcoming." "I'm glad." He gestured toward the door. "Shall we?" "I've made a reservation at the hotel dining room." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Boulder, with white tablecloths and actual china plates instead of tin. Several heads turned as they entered, curious about the new schoolteacher dining with the usually solitary rancher. Once seated, Matthew ordered for both of them after consulting Beatrice's preferences. As they waited for their meal, conversation flowed easily between them, ranging from books they'd read to Beatrice's plans for organizing her classes. "You seem very at home in Boulder already," Matthew observed. "As though you were meant to be here all along." "Perhaps I was," she replied thoughtfully. "Cherry Creek never truly felt like home, too transient, everyone seeking quick fortune rather than community." "And is community important to you?" "Very much so. My parents valued it highly." She hesitated, then added, "They died in a typhoid outbreak 2 years ago. I came west afterward, hoping for a fresh start." "I'm sorry for your loss," Matthew said, genuine sympathy in his eyes. "I lost my parents young as well, father to a mining accident, mother to pneumonia the following winter." "Is that why you came west, after the war?" He nodded slowly. "Partly. Also because back east, too many people looked at those of us who'd fought and only saw the killing we'd done. Out here, a man is judged more by what he builds than what he's destroyed." His candor touched her. "And what are you building, Matthew?" "A life worth living," he answered simply. "Good land, good cattle, a place that might someday—" He trailed off, seeming embarrassed. "Might someday what?" she prompted gently. "Be more than just a bachelor's ranch," he admitted. "A home, maybe. If the right circumstances arose." The implication hung between them, neither acknowledging it directly. Their meal arrived, providing a welcome distraction from the suddenly charged atmosphere. As they ate, Matthew told stories of his early ranching days, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned. Beatrice found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn in by his self-deprecating humor and obvious passion for his work. "You must come see it sometime," he said. "The ranch, I mean. It's not fancy, but there's a view from the north pasture that makes you believe in God even if you're having doubts." "I'd like that," she replied, meaning it. After dinner, Matthew walked Beatrice back to her quarters. The night was clear, stars blazing above in the vast Colorado sky. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager for the evening to end. "When will you next be in town?" Beatrice asked as they approached her door. 2 weeks, probably," he answered. "We're moving cattle to the summer pastures, which keeps us busy, but I could make it sooner if there were reason." She smiled at his transparency. 2 weeks is not so very long. At her door, Matthew took her hand gently. "Thank you for a pleasant evening, Beatrice." "I've enjoyed your company more than I can properly express." "As have I," she replied honestly. He held her gaze for a moment, then leaned forward slowly, giving her ample time to withdraw if she wished. Instead, she tilted her face upward, and his lips brushed her cheek in a kiss that was both respectful and full of promise. "Good night," he murmured, stepping back. "Good night, Matthew." Inside her quarters, Beatrice touched her cheek where his lips had been, surprised by the intensity of her response to such a simple gesture. She had known this man less than a week, yet already he had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Monday morning brought the beginning of classes. Beatrice stood before 28 students of varying ages and abilities, determined to make a good first impression. She introduced herself confidently, outlined her expectations, and began the process of assessing each child's educational level. By week's end, she had established a routine and begun to know her students' strengths and weaknesses. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying, exactly what she had hoped for when she chose teaching as her profession. Saturday brought a letter from Matthew, delivered by a ranch hand who'd come to town for supplies. The note was brief but thoughtful, inquiring about her first week of teaching and reaffirming his intention to visit in another week. Beatrice penned a response, describing her classes and the progress she was already seeing in some students. She hesitated before closing the letter, then added, "Your friendship has made this transition far easier than it might have been. I find myself looking forward to your next visit." The following Saturday, true to his word, Matthew appeared at her door, this time bearing a small bouquet of wildflowers. "From the meadow near the creek," he explained. "Nothing fancy, but they reminded me of you thriving where others might not even try." Their second dinner together was even more comfortable than the first, conversation flowing easily between topics serious and light. Afterward, they walked along Boulder Creek in the fading twilight, and Matthew tentatively took her hand. She laced her fingers with his, enjoying the strength and warmth of his touch. "I've been thinking about you," he admitted. "Probably more than is reasonable." "Define reasonable," she challenged with a smile. "Fair point," he chuckled. "Reason doesn't seem to apply when it comes to my feelings for you. The directness of his statement both thrilled and frightened her. "Matthew, we've known each other hardly any time at all, long enough for me to recognize something rare," he countered. "I'm not rushing you, Beatrice. I'm just being honest about where I stand." His honesty was refreshing after the duplicity she'd encountered in Cherry Creek. "I appreciate that, and she took a steadying breath. "I feel something too, something I wasn't looking for." He squeezed her hand gently. "That makes two of us." As spring turned to summer, Matthew's visits to Boulder became more frequent. He arranged his ranch work to allow for Saturday trips to town, and each visit deepened their connection. They discussed everything from politics to poetry, discovering a shared worldview despite their different backgrounds. In July, Matthew invited Beatrice to visit his ranch. Mindful of propriety, Mrs. Langdon accompanied them as chaperone, though she tactfully gave them space to explore the property together. The James Ranch exceeded Beatrice's expectations. The main house was modest but well built, with a wide porch overlooking rolling grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains. A barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings completed the homestead, all maintained with obvious care. "It's beautiful," Beatrice told him sincerely as they stood on the porch. "You've built something remarkable here." "It's still growing," he said. "Another few years, and the herd will be twice this size, if luck holds." They walked to the north pasture he'd mentioned during their first dinner. The view was indeed spectacular, sweeping plains giving way to the majestic Front Range, peaks still snow-capped even in summer. "You were right," she said softly. "This view does make one believe." Matthew watched her face rather than the landscape. "Beatrice, I need to tell you something." The seriousness of his tone made her turn to him. "What is it?" "I heard news from Cherry Creek yesterday. Mayor Hollister has been arrested." Shock rendered her momentarily speechless. "Arrested? For what?" "Land fraud, primarily. It seems your accusations prompted others to come forward with evidence. The territorial governor sent investigators." Vindication washed over her, not triumph exactly, but relief that truth had finally prevailed. "I never expected justice to come so quickly. Or at all," Matthew suggested gently. "Perhaps," she admitted. "After being banished, I assumed his influence would protect him indefinitely." "Courage inspires courage," Matthew said. "You struck the first spark, others fanned the flame." He took her hands in his. "You could return now if you wished. Your name has been cleared." The thought had never occurred to her. "Return to Cherry Creek, why would I?" "To reclaim what was taken from you," he suggested, though something in his eyes suggested he hoped she wouldn't consider it. Beatrice shook her head firmly. "Nothing was taken that I haven't found again and better in Boulder." She squeezed his hands. "I have no desire to go back." Relief visibly washed over him. "I'm glad to hear it." On the ride back to Boulder, Beatrice contemplated how thoroughly her life had changed in just a few months. From exile and uncertainty to purpose, and yes, growing affection for a man unlike any she'd known before. As summer progressed, Matthew and Beatrice's courtship became the subject of gentle town gossip. The schoolteacher and the rancher made an unlikely but well-matched pair in the eyes of Boulder citizens. Their Saturday outings became a familiar sight, whether dining at the hotel, attending church socials, or simply walking together through town. In August, a letter arrived for Beatrice from Cherry Creek. It contained a formal apology from the new town council, acknowledging the injustice of her treatment and offering her former teaching position back with increased salary. She showed the letter to Matthew during his next visit. "Will you accept?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "No," she answered without hesitation. "My life is here now." She didn't add "with you," but the words hung unspoken between them. His smile conveyed both relief and something deeper. "I'm grateful for that." The following week brought an unexpected visitor to Beatrice's classroom. As she dismissed her students for the day, she looked up to find Sheriff Taylor standing awkwardly by the door. "Afternoon, Miss Barlow," he greeted, hat in hand. "Might I have a word?" "Of course, Sheriff," she replied, gesturing to a chair. Is something wrong? Not wrong exactly. He settled his substantial frame onto the small student chair. It's about Matthew James. Alarm flickered through her. Has something happened to him? No, no, the sheriff assured her quickly. He's fine, it's just. He twisted his hat in his hands. Miss Barlow, how much has Matthew told you about his past? Before he came to Colorado, the question seemed invasive, but the sheriff's obvious discomfort suggested genuine concern rather than idle curiosity. I know he fought for the Union in the war, she answered carefully. That he came west afterwards seeking a fresh start. Sheriff Taylor nodded slowly. That's true enough, but there's more to the story. He sighed heavily. I wouldn't normally meddle in personal matters, but Matthew's a good man who's suffered more than his share. I'd hate to see misunderstandings cause further pain. What misunderstandings, Sheriff? There's talk coming from Cherry Creek, he explained. Seems Mayor Hollister had friends in Denver who aren't pleased about his arrest. They've been asking questions about you and Matthew, trying to find angles to discredit you both. Beatrice felt cold anger rising. I'm not surprised Hollister would seek revenge, but what does this have to do with Matthew's past? The sheriff leaned forward, lowering his voice though they were alone. Before the war, Matthew's family in Pennsylvania harbored runaway slaves. After his parents died, he continued their work with the Underground Railroad. When the war came, he joined up immediately. That hardly seems something to hide, Beatrice noted. No, but what came after might be, Taylor continued. After Appomattox, Matthew became a federal marshal tasked with tracking down war criminals, men who'd committed atrocities beyond the bounds of war. He developed a reputation for absolute integrity. Wouldn't take bribes, wouldn't look the other way, wouldn't stop hunting a man once he had evidence of guilt. Understanding dawned. He was banished too, in his own way. Taylor nodded. He arrested a powerful man's son for massacring former slaves. The evidence was irrefutable, but the father had connections. Matthew's reputation was smeared, death threats followed. He resigned his badge and came west, wanting nothing more than peace. Why are you telling me this, Sheriff? Because Hollister's friends are digging, and they'll eventually uncover Matthew's past. I wanted you to hear it from someone who respects him, not as twisted gossip. He stood, placing his hat back on his head. And because that man cares deeply for you, Miss Barlow. Deeper than I've ever seen him care for anyone or anything except justice. After the sheriff left, Beatrice sat alone in her classroom, processing this new information. Matthew's dedication to truth and integrity now made even more sense. It was the foundation of his character, tested through circumstances far more challenging than her own stand against Hollister. That Saturday, when Matthew arrived for their usual outing, Beatrice suggested they walk by the creek instead of dining at the hotel. Once they reached a private spot, she turned to him. Sheriff Taylor visited me this week, she began without preamble. He told me about your time as a marshal. Matthew's expression closed immediately, his body tensing. I see. After a long pause, he added, I should have told you myself. Why didn't you? He stared at the flowing water. That life feels like it belonged to someone else, someone harder, colder. He met her eyes. I didn't want you to see me that way. As a man who risked everything for justice, she challenged. Who stood for truth when it would have been easier to look away? That man sounds very familiar to me, Matthew, surprise registered on his face. You're not disturbed by my past. I'm disturbed that you felt you needed to hide it, she answered honestly. We've both been banished for loving truth, Matthew. It's part of what connects us. He took her hands, his grip almost desperate. Beatrice, I've never met anyone like you. Most people run from hard truths. I've spent years trying to outrun mine. But you face them head-on and somehow remain gentle despite it all. Not always gentle, she smiled slightly. Just ask Mayor Hollister. A short laugh escaped him. Fair point. His expression sobered. I'm sorry I wasn't more forthcoming. I was afraid to lose what we were building. We're building it on honesty, she reminded him. That has to include our pasts as well as our present. Relief washed over his features. I promise, no more secrets between us." As they continued their walk, Matthew gradually shared more details of his former life, the cases he'd pursued, the dangers he'd faced, the eventual betrayal by the very system he'd served faithfully. Beatrice listened, understanding more deeply with each revelation why this man valued truth so fiercely. When he finished, she asked the question that had been forming in her mind. "Do you miss it, being a marshal?" He considered this carefully. "I miss the purpose sometimes. The clarity of knowing my role in the world." His gaze softened as it rested on her. "But I've found new purpose here, building something instead of hunting men down. And if Hollister's friends continue their vendetta, if they bring your past to light in Boulder, then I'll face it," he said firmly. "I've done nothing I'm ashamed of, though plenty I regret." He squeezed her hand. "What about you? Are you prepared for them to dig into your history?" "My history is an open book," she replied, "though not nearly as exciting as yours." "I doubt that," he smiled. "Anyone who stands up to corruption the way you did has more courage than most men I've known with badges and guns." As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors, Matthew's visits to Boulder continued with increasing frequency. Beatrice's school thrived under her guidance, and her position in the community grew more secure with each passing week. The threatened gossip from Hollister's allies never materialized, perhaps because Sheriff Taylor had made inquiries of his own that discouraged such attempts. In late September, Matthew invited Beatrice to the ranch again, this time with a specific purpose. "The cattle drive to the lower pastures happens next week," he explained. "It's the most beautiful time on the ranch. I'd very much like to share it with you." Once again, Mrs. Langdon accompanied them as chaperone, though by now the entire town recognized their courtship as serious and honorable. The ranch was indeed at its most stunning, with aspens shimmering gold against the evergreens, and the distant peaks dusted with early snow. On their second evening after Mrs. Langdon had retired to the guest room, Matthew asked Beatrice to join him on the porch. The night was clear but cool, stars scattered across the vast sky like diamonds on black velvet. He had prepared a small fire in a stone pit, which provided both warmth and gentle illumination. "I've been thinking a great deal about the future," he began, his voice carrying in the still night, "about what I want for this ranch, for my life." Beatrice sensed the importance of this conversation. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That I've been building a home for a family I didn't have yet," he said simply. "That all this," he gestured to the expanse of land before them, "means little without someone to share it with, someone who values the same things I do." Her heart quickened as he turned to face her directly. "Beatrice, we've known each other less than a year, but I feel I've recognized your soul from the first moment we met. Your courage, your intelligence, your unwavering commitment to truth, these are rare qualities in this world or any other." He took her hands in his. "I know this may seem sudden, though it doesn't feel that way to me. I love you, Beatrice. I believe I began loving you that day in Cherry Creek when you stood your ground against Hollister, refusing to compromise your principles even when it cost you everything." Tears formed in her eyes, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I'm asking if you would consider joining your life with mine," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you would help me make this ranch a true home and allow me to support you in your teaching and whatever else you wish to pursue." "I don't expect an immediate answer." "Yes," she interrupted, squeezing his hands. "My answer is yes, Matthew." Surprise and joy transformed his features. "You're certain? I don't want to rush you." "I've never been more certain of anything," she assured him, her own voice trembling with emotion. "I love you too, for your honesty, your integrity, your gentleness that exists alongside such strength." She smiled through her tears. "We were both banished for loving truth. It seems only right we should build a life around that shared value." Matthew reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. From it, he produced a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of value I have from my family." He slipped it onto her finger, where it fit as though made for her. Beatrice Barlow, I promise to love you faithfully, to honor your independence and courage, and to build a life with you founded on truth and integrity. And I promise the same, she whispered, leaning forward to seal their commitment with a kiss that spoke of futures unfolding and dreams finally within reach. They agreed to marry at Christmas, giving them time to make proper arrangements. The news was received with enthusiasm in Boulder, where both had earned respect and affection from the community. Mayor Bennett offered the use of the town hall for the ceremony, and Mrs. Langdon insisted on hosting the wedding supper. One challenge remained Beatrice's position at the school. Female teachers were traditionally expected to resign upon marriage, a practice she found both impractical and unfair. When she raised this concern with Matthew, his response was immediate and supportive. "Your teaching is part of who you are," he said. "I would never ask you to abandon it." Together, they approached the school board with a proposition. Beatrice would continue teaching through the spring term, by which time they could assess the practicality of her traveling between the ranch and town. If distance proved too challenging, she proposed establishing a small school closer to the outlying ranches, where children currently received little or no formal education. To her surprise, the board was receptive to this progressive arrangement. Mayor Bennett, in particular, supported the idea of expanding educational opportunities beyond the town limits. "Boulder is growing," he noted. "We should be thinking about the future, not clinging to outdated conventions." As winter approached, preparations for both wedding and future living arrangements accelerated. Matthew added a study to the ranch house specifically for Beatrice's books and papers. She, in turn, began organizing teaching materials that could be transported between locations as needed. 2 weeks before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived in Boulder. Beatrice was grading papers in her classroom when a shadow fell across her desk. Looking up, she was stunned to see her former student Sally standing in the doorway, accompanied by her father, Miss Barlow. The girl exclaimed, rushing forward. "We found you." Beatrice embraced the child warmly, then extended her hand to the blacksmith. "Mr. Thompson, this is a surprise. What brings you to Boulder?" "Change of scenery," he answered gruffly. "Cherry Creek ain't been the same since the trouble. Too many folks taking sides even after Hollister got what was coming to him." He shifted uncomfortably. "Heard Boulder was growing, figured a good smithy could find work here." "I'm certain of it," Beatrice assured him. "Boulder is indeed thriving." Sally tugged at her sleeve. "Pa says you're getting married, to a real rancher," Beatrice laughed. "Yes, indeed, the wedding is in 2 weeks. On impulse, she added, you must both attend if you're staying in town." The Thompsons weren't the only former Cherry Creek residents to relocate to Boulder that winter. The upheaval following Hollister's arrest had exposed deep divisions in the settlement, prompting several families to seek new beginnings elsewhere. Most brought positive reports of Beatrice's character and teaching ability, further cementing her position in Boulder society. On Christmas Eve, the town hall was transformed with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. Despite the winter chill, the room was warmed by the presence of nearly every Boulder resident, along with Matthew's ranch hands and neighbors from outlying homesteads. Matthew waited at the front of the hall, looking uncharacteristically nervous in his best suit. When Beatrice appeared at the entrance on Mayor Bennett's arm, standing in for her father, a hush fell over the gathering. She wore a gown of deep blue silk, her one extravagance for the occasion, with her mother's locket around her neck and winter roses in her hair. As she moved toward Matthew, Beatrice felt a profound sense of rightness. Their journey to this moment had begun with injustice and exile, yet had led to a partnership founded on shared principles and genuine love. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, their vows reflecting both their personal journey and their commitment to a life built on honesty. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "My wife," he whispered as they turned to face their community as a married couple. "My husband," she replied, the words both foreign and perfectly natural on her lips. The celebration that followed was joyous and continued well into the night. As they prepared to depart for the ranch, their home now, Sheriff Taylor approached with an unexpected wedding gift. "This came by special courier from Denver this morning," he explained, handing Matthew an official-looking envelope. Matthew opened it, read quickly, and passed it to Beatrice with an expression of wonder. It was a letter from the territorial governor, acknowledging both their stands against corruption and formally commending them for their courage. More significantly, it contained an appointment for Matthew as a deputy territorial marshal, not a full-time position, but one that would allow him to serve when needed while maintaining his ranch. "Seems your reputation survived after all," Beatrice said softly. "Truth has a way of emerging eventually," he replied, slipping the letter into his pocket, "though I'll only accept if you're comfortable with it." "I married you knowing exactly who you are," she reminded him, "including the part that will always stand for justice." Their first months of marriage passed in a blur of adjustment and joy. Beatrice continued teaching in Boulder while helping to establish their shared life at the ranch. The distances sometimes proved challenging, but they developed a rhythm that allowed for both professional commitments and domestic happiness. By spring, they had converted one of the ranch outbuildings into a small schoolhouse. With the school board's blessing, Beatrice began teaching there 3 days a week, serving children from neighboring ranches who had previously gone without formal education. The remaining 2 days, she taught in Boulder, staying overnight at Mrs. Langdon's when necessary. Matthew's occasional duties as deputy marshal took him away at times, but never for long. His expertise proved valuable in resolving land disputes and tracking down the occasional outlaw, while his integrity earned him respect throughout the territory. In the summer of their first anniversary, Beatrice shared news that would change their lives again. She was expecting their first child. Matthew's response was a mixture of joy, concern, and immediate practical planning. "We'll need to adjust your teaching schedule," he said, already thinking ahead. "Perhaps consolidate classes at the ranch during the winter months." "Always the strategist," she teased, though she appreciated his consideration. "The baby isn't due until winter. We have time to arrange things." Their son, James William James, was born on a snowy January night in 1861, with Mrs. Langdon assisting and Matthew pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When finally allowed to enter, he approached the bed with uncharacteristic hesitation, looking at the tiny bundle in Beatrice's arms with awe. "He's perfect," Matthew whispered, gently touching his son's cheek. "Just like his mother. He has your chin," Beatrice observed, tired but radiant, "and I suspect he'll have your determination as well." "Heaven help us if he inherits both our stubborn streaks," Matthew laughed softly. Little James thrived in the ranch environment. Beatrice adjusted her teaching to accommodate motherhood, bringing the baby with her to the ranch schoolhouse and arranging for Mrs. Thompson, who had indeed followed her husband to Boulder to help when she taught in town. Life settled into a new pattern, busy but fulfilling. Matthew's herd prospered, allowing for expansion of both the ranch and their educational initiatives. By the time James was walking, the ranch schoolhouse had doubled in size to accommodate growing numbers of students. In the spring of 1863, their family grew again with the birth of a daughter, Elizabeth Rose. Matthew proved as devoted a father as he was a husband, sharing childcare responsibilities whenever possible and supporting Beatrice's continued commitment to education. As their children grew, so too did their legacy in the Boulder community. The James Ranch became known not only for its fine cattle, but as a place where education and integrity were valued above all else. The school Beatrice had established became a model for other rural educational efforts throughout the territory. In 1867, as Colorado moved toward statehood, Matthew was asked to serve on the Territorial Constitutional Convention, a recognition of his reputation for fairness and principle. Though hesitant to take on such a political role, he accepted with Beatrice's encouragement. The founding of a state should be guided by people who value truth, she reminded him, just as we've built our life on that foundation. During the weeks Matthew spent in Denver at the convention, Beatrice maintained both their home and schools with characteristic efficiency. 8-year-old James proved his father's son by insisting on taking on man-of-the-house duties, while 6-year-old Elizabeth helped with her mother's teaching. When Matthew returned, he brought news that would further shape their future. "They've asked me to stand for the state legislature," he told Beatrice privately after the children were asleep. "I told them I'd need to discuss it with my wife." Beatrice considered this thoughtfully. "It would mean more time away from the ranch, from us." "That's my hesitation exactly," he admitted. "I've no desire for political power, but I do believe we need honest voices in government. Then perhaps we should consider it," she suggested, "not for ambition's sake, but as another form of service. The same reason I teach, the same reason you once wore a badge." Matthew took her hand, still marveling at how completely this woman understood him. "I told them I'd only consider it if my wife could join me in Denver during sessions. I'll not be separated from my family for months at a time." "A progressive approach," Beatrice smiled. "Though I suspect they'll agree, if only to secure your participation." Indeed, arrangements were made for the entire James family to reside in Denver during legislative sessions, with trusted hands managing the ranch in their absence. Beatrice established connections with Denver educators, sharing her innovative approaches to rural education while learning from their urban perspective. In 1876, when Colorado finally achieved statehood, Matthew James was among those who signed its constitution. The ceremony in Denver was attended by territorial pioneers and newly arrived citizens alike, all witnessing the birth of the centennial state. As they returned to the ranch afterward, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "When I was banished from Cherry Creek, I thought my life in Colorado was over," she told Matthew as their carriage approached the homestead. "I could never have imagined where that path would lead. To think I almost didn't go to town that day," Matthew marveled. "If I'd delayed my supply run by even a day." "I believe we would have found each other somehow," Beatrice said with conviction. "Some connections are simply meant to be." Matthew's hand covered hers. "When I saw Hollister threatening you, something in me recognized you immediately, not your face but your spirit, standing alone for truth, regardless of consequences. And when you said we'd live honest together," Beatrice smiled at the memory, "I thought you were being gallant. I didn't realize you were predicting our future." As they crested the hill, overlooking their ranch, now a substantial operation with additional buildings, fenced pastures, and the schoolhouse that had grown into a proper educational center, Matthew stopped the carriage. Below them, James and Elizabeth raced from the house, alerted to their parents' return by the sound of wheels on the road. "This," Matthew said softly, "is what truth built, not just buildings and land, but family, community, purpose." Beatrice leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching their children's approach. "Truth," she agreed, "and love, each impossible without the other." As the years passed, the James family continued to thrive. James followed his father into ranching, while Elizabeth showed her mother's passion for education, eventually becoming one of Colorado's first female college graduates. 2 more children joined the family, Robert in 1868 and Margaret in 1870, each finding their own path while maintaining the family's commitment to integrity. Matthew served 2 terms in the state legislature before declining further political involvement, preferring to focus on his growing family and ranch. His occasional duties as a deputy marshal continued until he officially retired the position in 1880, passing the responsibility to a younger man he had mentored. Beatrice's educational work expanded beyond their immediate area, as she advised on curriculum development for rural schools throughout Colorado. Her methods for teaching children of varying ages and abilities in a single classroom became widely adopted, and she authored several educational texts based on her experiences. In 1899, 40 years after Beatrice's banishment from Cherry Creek, the James family gathered at the ranch to celebrate Matthew and Beatrice's ruby wedding anniversary. Children, grandchildren, and friends from throughout their years in Colorado filled the expanded homestead with laughter and stories. During a quiet moment on the porch, the same porch where Matthew had proposed 4 decades earlier, he took Beatrice's hand, his touch as gentle as ever despite years of ranch work. "Any regrets?" he asked, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Beatrice considered the question seriously, as was her nature. "None," she answered finally. "Every challenge led us here to this life we've built together." She turned to study his face, still handsome though now lined with age and experience. "What about you? Ever wish you'd chosen an easier wife than the troublemaking schoolteacher?" Matthew's laugh was as rich as it had been in his younger days. "Never for a moment, though I did occasionally wish you were less right about things." "Only occasionally," she teased. "Well, perhaps more than occasionally," he admitted with a wink. "But then, I didn't marry you for a quiet life. I married you because you loved truth as much as I did." "Love," she corrected softly. "Present tense, Matthew James, some things never change." As twilight deepened over the ranch they had built together, Matthew drew his wife closer. "Then we'll continue living honest together," he murmured, echoing words spoken long ago to a brave young woman facing exile, "for however many years we have left." Beatrice rested her head against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. From banishment to belonging, from solitude to family, their journey had indeed been built on truth and the courage to stand for it, whatever the cost. Together, they had created not just a home or legacy, but a testament to the power of integrity and love to transform even the harshest beginnings into a life of profound meaning and joy. "Together," she agreed, watching their grandchildren play in the yard below. The best word in any language. And as stars appeared in the Colorado sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their wedding, the births of their children, and all the ordinary moments that composed an extraordinary life, Matthew and Beatrice James remained side by side, their shared commitment to truth having built something far more precious than either could have created alone. A life of authentic purpose, unwavering integrity, and enduring love.